Hi YouTube. It's me, Ren. I know it's been a little bit, but I have been thinking about a certain franchise that I think we have in the last couple years had a bit of a death of discourse about, for very obvious reasons. And if you've read the title, you probably know that I'm talking about Harry Potter, but in case you don't, I'm talking about Harry Potter. And I want to say, like, why I'm talking about Harry Potter because I feel like I need to defend myself. Even if I'm criticizing Harry Potter, I still need to defend myself, the fact that I'm talking about it at all. And I think I'll get to why I think it's still important to talk about Harry Potter in a second, but I want to explain why I've been thinking about Harry Potter in the first place. So I'm currently taking a second year literature and creative communications course around essays. And every week we have to read like several essays, right? As you do for a course about essays. And one of the ones we read a little while ago was E.M. Forster's Notes on an English Character. Now, obviously, I hadn't read that essay before. I had never even read anything by E.M. Forster, I don't think. But it really struck me as I was reading it just how much Harry Potter is a very English series. Um, it was just so many. I have 2 pages of notes. It was just so, like, maybe it shows my brainworms that I was reading an essay, like a renowned essay by a famous novelist, and I immediately was thinking about Harry Potter. But I'm gonna draw some conclusions. So his main argument is that the English character is essentially middle class, he says. Other countries, the culture trickles up from the lower class or it trickles down from the upper class, but he argues that in England it's the middle class, right? And he says because of that, the English character is very informed by the public school system with its boarding houses, compulsory games, and prefects. Um, he says that many men look back on their school days as the happiest of their lives, and they attribute all the good in the world, basically, to school. And they worship school. He talks about, like, metaphors and the way that people have spoken about wars and, like, oh, the Battle of blah, blah, blah was won on the fields of Eton, just reflecting everything back to school. And that kind of got me thinking about Harry Potter because I think there's been a lot of ink spilled by Americans specifically, but also just like people who aren't from England more generally about how, like, oh, it's so weird that all the adults in Harry Potter are obsessed with like what house someone was in, or like why don't the adults have fun jobs? There are like 3 fun jobs that you can have. Everyone works at the same company. Like, it's basically like once you've graduated Hogwarts, your life is over. And I think that that is not a failure in world building on the part of J.K. Rowling. I think it is an honest reflection of a certain kind of English life. Um, and here is where we come to the big reason why I think it's still important to talk about Harry Potter. Um, I think it's because not all that can be said has been said, and it's such a large media franchise that those things are important to the culture that we have today. Like, without Harry Potter and all of its flaws, the current media landscape would be very, very different. And I'm going to make some arguments about, like, the ways that that is the case, but I think in this specifically, it really frustrates me that so much media criticism seems to be so American focused that we miss one of the like most, or how do I say this? To me, one of the most clear things about Harry Potter that is reflected in people's criticisms of it. I think about the way that people have talked about the time turner thing as indicative of world building issues, but I think the time turner destruction specifically, but I actually relate it back to something. Of course, it is maybe bad world building, but in E.M. Forster's essay, he talks about English spirituality and how it's very functional and very almost spirituality without the spirituality. He talks about how the English had a reformation because of like court drama in comparison to Germany, who had a reformation because Luther was a really passionate guy, and how like, you know, going to church is some kind of routine. Like there's not, English spirituality is not as spiritual as other spirituality. And I honestly kind of see that reflected in the way that J.K. Rowling wrote about magic, and how something like the Time Turners didn't really have that much thematic weight. Like, thinking back on it, so much of the magic in Harry Potter, it's not written the way that I would write about magic. Like, the way that I would write about magic, everything that I wrote would be connected back to some kind of theme. Or it would be like, relevant in some way to a greater emotional narrative. Whereas I think that's not really how J.K. Rowling wrote. I think that's not how a lot of writers write magic, which frustrates me. But specifically, like, the idea of, you know, the time turners being destroyed, or the Amortentia potion just being used to reveal that Hermione's realizing she has a crush on Ron or whatever the hell. I don't even remember. I haven't read the books that recently. It's like, this is all very functional as opposed to spiritual or interconnected. Like, there's a lot of disdain in the books for divination, which is probably, like, if I think about it, the most spiritual of the forms of magic that people do in Harry Potter. It's like she set out to write a book about magic that is unspiritual, which I think it's really interesting. Like, I'm not saying it's flat out awful. I don't think that. Ignore the person mowing if you can hear someone mowing. But I just, like, I think that has gone kind of unremarked upon. But I also think it's important. Like, just because we've thrown out J.K. Rowling as an artist and we no longer care about the work that she's done, she's clearly influenced a lot of people. Like, there are a lot of stories about magic that are being written or have been written quite recently that I think share this kind of unspiritual bent to them that I just find like a little lacking. I mean, I can think off the top of my head, I'm thinking of some examples, but I don't want to say them because I don't want to offend people. I know this is probably not the place and time on my YouTube channel to stop trying to offend people, but like, rest assured, I'm thinking of things that I could say. I'm thinking a little bit about Percy Jackson, and I'm thinking a little bit about Brandon Sanderson, and yeah. So anyway, I want to get on to the non E.M. Forster related stuff that I wanted to say. And I wanted to start with, I think what kind of comes from that is a sense of world building over anything else. Like world building as paramount instead of some kind of theme or a message or an experience, even. It's like world building is more important than the actual story itself. Um, and I think like that's something that I have noticed quite a bit in the way that contemporary creativity and storytelling gets discussed. Like the number of people that I've spoken to who aspire to write who have said like no, I want to write a novel, but all I've been doing is world building. Like they're fucking coming up with languages before themes. Like it's very made up fact first, actual intent later. Like I think about the the apps that people have created that I see like advertised on YouTube for world building. And it's like, am I the only person who would rather read a story that cares about being a story than more than like an exposition of facts that you made up? Like I honestly I'm thinking about Caleb Gammon's Dune video right now. If you haven't seen it, you should go watch it. It's hilarious. But I keep saying honestly as well. Sorry. Um it really frustrates me because I can I can see how it comes from Harry Potter, right? Like as much as people want to pretend that Harry Potter never existed in a way, um Harry Potter has a theme park because of its world building. Harry Potter has such a massive fandom, or had such a massive fandom because of its world building. Like, oh, there's enough tidbits around that you can, like, take some name of a character who existed hypothetically 50 years earlier and write something about them. Or you've heard of a magic school that exists in a completely different location, and so you can, like, write a story about that. Like, there's so many ways in which you can spin out the little fragments of the world, or how you can do a bunch of quizzes, or you can um, read a bunch of transformative work. Like, there's so much stuff that you can do because of the little spindly wires of fandom, or sorry, world building that J.K. Rowling created, that she spun out for years and years and years, right? And I think, that has clearly made Harry Potter as a franchise much more profitable than if it had been a more self contained, narrative focused story. If it had, like, if J.K. Rowling had not been just throwing out names, if she hadn't been like, oh yeah, we're never going to actually involve any of these other magic schools, but like, they exist, by the way, if you even care. And then people cared. And so I think it makes complete sense that more recent creative works have tried to take inspiration from that because it clearly worked so well, you know? And I think that has gone unsaid. I think it's gone unsaid. I think the house system in Harry Potter was and still is one of the most marketable things about it. So of course we had fucking Divergent, you know? Of course we've had a bazillion sorting rituals. There's a belonging narrative that Harry Potter kind of pioneered, I think. Like of course there were stories before Harry Potter that had some kind of sorting system. But you're not going to convince me that Harry Potter didn't popularize that in YA. You're not. Um, and like, has that been a good addition? Has it been a bad addition? Like, that's something that we could discuss further. But I'm just frustrated with the notion of like, read another book, pretend Harry Potter never existed. Because like, I appreciate trying not to give J.K. Rowling more clout, but at the same time, I don't think recognizing the ways that Harry Potter has influenced popular culture to this day is actually bad. Like, that's something that we've done with all works of art and should continue to do with all works of art, regardless of the creator. Like, there's a shit ton of media out there made by incredibly bad people who have done bad things, maybe even in the name of that art, that we still talk about. I don't think Harry Potter should be an exception to that, even if J.K. Rowling's still alive. Um, I think there's been an extent to which people have been satisfied in the discussions we've had about Harry Potter by little social media quips. Like, people have kind of taken some mini fact-based criticisms of Harry Potter and just regurgitated them over and over again to the point that everyone feels like the discussion is tired. Like, oh, did you know that the Time Turners plot hole? Did you know that um actually Cho is a last name and so it's kind of like racist that she used it as the first name for a Chinese character? Oh my gosh, check out this description of Rita Skeeter. Doesn't it seem kind of transphobic? Like, it's very quippy. It's very gotcha. It's very, this is a tweet, you know? It's, I think it's satisfied people to have little one off, like, takedowns that they can share around. But is that enough? I don't think it's actually enough. In fact, I think it's distracting in a bad way because when you criticize J.K. Rowling for writing a Chinese character named Cho Chang, um, obviously horrible, obviously quite cringe in retrospect, but who's going to make that mistake in the future? You know, like, and who made that mistake in the past, if we're being honest? Like, sure, there have been bad names for Asian people in fiction before, but the specific criticism of, oh, Cho is like a last name, like, what effect is that actually going to have going forward? Like, how is our reflecting on that going? How does that take our current climate of creative fiction into account? And I say that because I think there are other criticisms of Harry Potter, like the ones I was talking about with the English character shit, that are more relevant. And I'm not saying that to say people shouldn't criticize Harry Potter for the little things that were shitty about it, especially the little things that were racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever. But I am saying I don't think that's enough. Like, our culture isn't done with Harry Potter. Our culture will potentially never be done with Harry Potter. And so I'm not interested in pretending that I am. You know, like, I care about where we are. Um, I want to talk about some more examples of like things that I think Harry Potter has influenced in our popular culture. I want to talk about the concept of children's media as the only media. or like, because my transitions are getting worse and worse as we go along, but you're just gonna have to ignore that. This has also not been that funny, but I think I have things to say, so I'm saying them, and that's what's important to me right now. When it comes to the childification of media right now, like I'm talking about YouTube baby talk, I'm talking about a dearth of R-rated movies, I'm talking about lack of sex scenes, which if you don't believe that there aren't as many sex scenes as there used to be, there's plenty of stuff for you to look at online that would tell you that I'm correct, okay? I think a big reason why that's currently the case, or why that's different than it used to be, is that there were a series of franchises that were child appropriate that made a shit ton of money. And so I think a lot of the corporations that now bankroll things almost exclusively were like, oh, right, so everything's going to be for kids now. Let's make it all for kids. Even the stuff that's ostensibly for an adult audience should be appropriate for kids. And I think Harry Potter was one of those franchises that proved that to people who had power. And I think that something that got lost was the fact that the reason Harry Potter had as much longevity and was as beloved as it was because it was, it grew up with Harry, right? Like, it started out having a lot of childish whimsy, and then it slowly became darker. And at the end, you know, you had, like, horrible deaths of children occurring in the story, you know? Like, it really escalated. Like, it went from childish whimsy to war story, you know? And I think that has not necessarily been replicated. I just don't think it has been. Like, sure, there are, maybe there are stories that grow up slightly with kids, but not the same way. Like, Percy Jackson tries somewhat, but Percy Jackson isn't the kind of series that you can read the first book when you're 5 or you can have the first book read to you when you're 5 and it feels perfect, and then read the final book when you're 17 and it feels perfect. Like, it's for like 10 to 15-year-olds to read. You know, it's a much smaller range. Whereas I think Harry Potter was, like, I had the first book read to me when I was 5, and I happily read the last book, like, a few years ago. I don't think that's true of a lot of other media. Like, I remember my mom and my dad being really excited for the last Harry Potter movie to come out. You know, like, that's not going to be true when they inevitably finish redoing Percy Jackson in audiovisual form. You know, it's just not. And so I think there's been a Harry Potter inspired turn to child-friendly media that doesn't actually reflect the kind of varied audience nature of Harry Potter. And again, I don't think that's been really discussed. I haven't seen anyone else talk about that. And so I'm not done. Another thing, I think a lot of the love for Harry Potter did come from the fact that J.K. Rowling was really involved. That she was, for all intents and purposes, an auteur. I did say that in a certain way. That is probably wrong, but we'll ignore that for now. J.K. Rowling was like, she was on Pottermore. She was like responding to people's fan art. She cared about the fan fiction. She was a big reason why fan fiction has a place online now that it did not have in the early 2000s. Like, she championed transformative work in a way that a lot of writers before her didn't. And I think that kind of almost cult of personality, but really I'll call it authorship, that was a big deal. Like, she was part of the appeal to Harry Potter. And that's part of what I think allowed it to become the cultural tour de force that it was. Like, there were a lot of people who were invested in Harry Potter in a big part because of J.K. Rowling. The fact that there was this cohesive creative vision, that, you know, the website and the spin-off series and the movies, like, they didn't feel like corporate schlock because they weren't corporate schlock. Like, sure, people were making money off of it. Sure, a big studio was bankrolling it. But J.K. Rowling was sitting there, like, behind the scenes, like, yep, this is my shit. This is the shit that I'm doing. You know? And I think that gave people faith in its creativity in a way that now, like, when you see the 15th Marvel movie coming out, you're like, well, damn. Like, does anyone actually care about this anymore? I think there's been a lot of franchise focus in the last decade that was inspired by Harry Potter, and yet missed the fact that the reason Harry Potter was allowed to be the franchise in the way that it was because it had a central auteur, which these franchises don't. So I think that's also worth talking about and has not been talked about. And I realize that both of those things are somewhat deferential to Harry Potter as a series and potentially even J.K. Rowling herself. In case this is seen by, like, people who don't know me, I'm non-binary, and I have a lot of friends who are transgender. I have a sibling who's transgender. I really care about trans acceptance and trans rights, and it makes me really angry, the things that J.K. Rowling has said and done. And I still believe that we're not done with Harry Potter. And maybe that's something to be sad about. Maybe, like, you can be sad about it. But I don't think we should deny it. And that's the video. See y'all in the comments.